names pop up. Welcome, everyone. It's a little after 11:02, so we'll do the brief introduction. For those of you who've been here before, you've heard this, but every once in a while we have a couple of new Growing Climate Solution attendees or stakeholders, and it's always nice to give them an overview. I'm really excited to wrap up the Y&How sustainability workshops for this season with composting. It is, the end of the cycle, so it's very appropriate. Today we have Randall Penn, and he's going to talk to us about how to make some black gold. It's really exciting. For those of you who are new to Growing Climate Solutions, a little bit about our organization. Growing Climate Solutions' missions and goal is to create a network of institutions and stakeholders, and we have new institutions and new stakeholders on this call, that will work together in our Southwest regional community to build climate awareness. We focus a lot on protecting the natural assets, which are so critical in our region. We want to empower all the Southwest Floridians to support and engage on equitable climate solutions. So some people don't know how, and some people have felt that they wanted to, but they were on their own. And by finding a network of people that think along the same lines, we want to give them sort of a network to advance these climate solution goals. We also work with our partners to increase the visibility of local solutions. So if your organization is doing something novel, or you're just embarking on a sustainability journey, we want to hear about it and tell others in the community about it, so that our region can become a national role model on how you move a community forward. But ultimately, the goal is to create a healthy and prosperous and resilient community against these challenges. So one of the ways, or the various ways in which we operate, is we provide these education forums. We had the Southwest Florida Compass series, which is our evening lecture series. It brings national topics to our front door. We work with individual homeowners associations or clubs or presentations. We can arrange those for you to have a speaker come in. I do a lot of that speaking. And we also have this Y&How series, which are sort of the roll up your sleeves and learn about a particular topic. Maybe we can get you to move forward. We also offer our expertise to organizations that want to do something and may need a little support. So Bridget, who is my associate on this call, she leads our tree planting initiatives and has a couple coming up. So come to our website and learn about that. We've been working with the Southwest Florida Resilience Compact and other organizations on Sanibel or in Fort Myers. Any organization that needs a little help, we're sort of here as a free resource. And finally, we try to communicate new information through our bi-monthly newsletter, our social media postings, so you can keep in touch with what we do and spread the word, and our educational flyer that lists all the different events that you might want to do outside of Growing Climate Solutions, both ours and our partners, to continue your learning. The Y&How workshops were new this year, and we hope to continue next year. The goal was to create a place where you can learn about actionable ideas on a specific topic, like today on composting. We bring local experts to provide local solutions. And as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on our website. We use the Zoom meeting format, not a webinar. So please stay muted and possibly turn your camera off to avoid distractions. Because it's in meeting, everybody can see you, and we like that. At the end of our discussion or the end of our presentation, we want a lively discussion. So I ask you to hold your questions toward the end, and we'll try to devote about a half an hour in the second half of the presentation to answering those questions with Randall. Finally, after this, you will receive a 5-question survey with a sort of recap of some tidbits and the main takeaway points. Please do your part and answer the survey. It really helps us understand the value of this and plan for next year. And without further ado, I want to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Randall Penn, the UF IFAS Waste Reduction Faculty Agent. And in that role, Mr. Penn is responsible for designing, coordinating, evaluating, and reporting on research-based education programs that focus on solid waste. His responsibilities include implementing a comprehensive waste reduction program and composting program, as well as coordinating with Sarasota County's Green Business Partnership Program. He also serves as an adjunct professor with UF Sports Management Department, teaching courses on environmental sustainability in sports. So without further delay, let me let Randall take it away and teach us how to make black gold.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. That was actually excellent. I didn't realize I did all that type of stuff. So let me know if you can see my screen there. Is that up? Give me a little thumbs up. That'd be great. Should pop up. We good to go on that?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. All right. Well, today I really am happy to be here and talk a little bit about what we do at the University of Florida through the Extension Service, and really just talk about the issue of food waste across the state of Florida. I just want to show a couple logos you might be familiar with that tell a little bit about the IFAS Extension. We're part of the University of Florida, but we really aren't up on campus. We work in the local communities. So we have offices in every county across the state of Florida. I am based out of Sarasota County, but you have an office there in Collier County, Lee County, all across. And these are a few of the programs you may be familiar with. The Sea Grant program, working with a lot of the coastal environments, Master Gardener program, which is our volunteer related program. And we may even have a couple 4-H members, which is our youth program that we tie into. So today I'm going to kind of run through just the issue of and the impacts of food waste. You know, why do we care, right? And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we're currently doing. And then we'll get into some of the things you can do to kind of have a positive impact on your community. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'll take you through the steps to build a successful composting system. I will say when I started doing compost with the University of Florida, it's probably been 6 or 7 years now. I thought it was only going to be a small side component of what I do. But it really has been surprising and exciting for me because the issue has continued to grow. It's really the next step that we need to take to help solve a lot of our different issues. So all my classes, I like to start with this infographic here about the issue of food waste, right? And I break it down into 3 ways. It's excessive, it's expensive, and then there are these environmental harmful impacts as a result. So we throw away 40% of all the food we produce in this country. As you can imagine, that's a tremendous amount of weight, 133 billion pounds that get thrown away. Most that ends up in our landfills. If you have 40% of your system just becoming wasted, it's obviously at a large cost. It's expensive. And then there are these environmental impacts. So I want to take through a few of those real quick and kind of frame out that issue and really what's going on across the state of Florida. For those visual type learners, we throw enough food waste away to fill up our football stadium up there in the swamp 2 times a day, every day for the entire year. And that's the weight across the country. So lots of food waste getting in there, and we're not really handling it in the correct manner, and there are better ways to do that. So why does the state of Florida care? Why do I have this position as this waste reduction agent across the state? Well, it really started in 2008 when the state of Florida passed House Bill 7135. And that was to set targets for all counties across Florida to reach a 75% recycling rate by the year 2020. Well, obviously we've gone past 2020, right? I have not seen any new targets or any new forecasts put out in any of the legislative sessions as of yet, but it still started that framework that different counties like Collier and Sarasota used to increase the recycling rate. You know, we only made it to about 49% as a statewide. And while that fell short, it still is much better than when we started. You know, we were down in the 12%, 15% for some counties back then. So it helped to build a lot of that curbside infrastructure that we see now in different places. You had mentioned, you know, some of the courses that you may be looking to in the future. We can certainly dive into recycling, single stream recycling, and all those issues. And we can do that another day. But down in the bottom corner, I wanted to show what your recycling rates were in Lee County and Collier. And these are from 2020. Lee County reports at 76% and Collier is 74%. Now, I do have a little bullet below there that says 20% energy credit or 20% renewable credit is listed both ways. In Lee County, all the things that aren't able to be recycled and some of the landfill stuff too, go to a waste to energy type system. It's not traditional site recycling like we think of when we put our bins out and it goes off and it gets turned into new products. They get an extra credit for turning it into waste to energy. So really, if you were to look at it, Lee County is probably more in the 56 to 57% as a traditional range. Collier reports some amazing numbers. I'd really like to dive in to see what they're doing down there because that's pretty impressive. That's got to be about the highest in the state. But the problem with getting those rates up to a 75%, or if we really want to as a state of Florida, we need to look kind of at this pie chart here. These are all the different ingredients that kind of go into the landfill. Somebody needs to mute there. And then we have concrete and demolition debris, metal, paperboard, all these things. But a large part of it is organics. And if we were to kind of look inside that organic amount, which is about 25%, most of that is going to be food waste. Joanna there, could you maybe hit your mute there? It's kind of giving me a little feedback. That'd be great. Other parts of that organic pie, that 25%, are some yard waste gets in there. All that different kind of paperboard gets in there as well. So those kind of all add together to create that. And it's a tremendous amount of weight when you think of that. It's 25% of our waste stream. So to kind of go back to that 75% recycling target, if we ever want to reach that as a state, we have to consider organics as part of the equation, or just the math won't work. We'll never get there. That's why composting is so important to think about as part of that issue. And then from the economic side, that actually every family wastes about $1,500 in food. We just throw it away. For those of you who have composted before or are looking to start to compost, one thing you'll notice right away is that the amount of stuff you throw away every week curbside in your trash is going to be reduced. It's because a lot of that stuff comes from the food that we don't eat. And it's just, so you'll notice that right away. The other thing I want to point out that we care about from the extension is this food dollar. And this really breaks down every component of the food system and how much each person or entity get from it. You know, the farmers are on the left there. They get about 12 cents or 12% of that food dollar, of that economic system or that supply chain, right? We hear so much about supply chains now and things like that. And as you go along there, you can see there's the processing, the packaging, the transportation. And we know that's going way up, right? The cost there, the retail trade, the food services, all our food is increasing now over the last several months. And that's going to play an impact on how much the farm gets. So that's why we try to come up with ways to grow more efficiently, effective through the extension. That's why we care so much. So that kind of frames the issue from that economic side. And then lastly, there are these environmental impacts, right? And this kind of feeds in to your group here with growing climate solutions, right? So when we throw away our food waste into the landfill, it gets covered up. And it gets starved of air of the system. All the oxygen gets moved out. And these microorganisms there come in and they start breaking down this organic material. They break down that food waste. When they do, they produce two primary biogases, carbon dioxide and methane. The methane is produced at a much higher degree, upwards of about 65% of that gas produced. The reason we're concerned about it is when that methane gets released up into our atmosphere, it has much more intensity than even the carbon dioxide does. We're seeing 25 times more intense, and they measure that over kind of a 100-year period with the EPA. And our landfills are a large contributor of methane emissions across the board. All right, and this kind of shows the emissions that happen as a result of greenhouse gases right now. So you can see the methane sits at about 11% of all the emissions coming out. Carbon dioxide still dominates that, but that methane, a large part of it is because of our landfill type systems. Now, it's pretty interesting that in Sarasota, we actually capture our methane, we cool it, and we feed it back into the system. But not all landfills have that sort of system in place. All right, I know this is really small and really kind of a busy chart, but I think it's kind of important to look at. On the left side here, it has all these different ingredients that we recycle: paper, glass, aluminum, textiles, wood. And I highlighted food and yard trimmings. And these come from the EPA reporting numbers. A lot of times you'll see when you look online and look at some statistics and stuff, you'll see composting listed, and it will say, gosh, we compost about 15% or 18%. That's not necessarily true. A lot of times they group compost and food waste together. They confuse it. The yard trimmings are often called composting at a lot of places. So here they're separated out. We can kind of see how much is actually being recycled. And you can see 2.57 million tons across the state, across the country. Very low percent of that is being composted as opposed to yard waste, much more. But if you go to near the last column, it has little parentheses there, and it shows 6.9 million megatons of carbon emissions. So by composting food waste, it is a net positive. It's actually pulling that greenhouse gas out of the equation for what's measured. That's why it's great to recycle and do that, because it has those emissions and the potential to lessen those emissions. Kind of a busy chart, but just shows you some of the different positives that recycling have on the environment. Recycling has a really positive impact on our carbon footprint. All right, so that's kind of the background stuff. That's kind of the numbers and data that we love so much at the university, right? But what are some solutions? What can we do, as individuals, as communities, to kind of have a positive on our issue related to climate and food waste reduction? Well, if you look at the hierarchy from most preferred to least preferred from the EPA, number one is just source reduction. Purchase less food, smarter purchasing options, trying to eliminate and reduce some of the stuff that we do. Feeding hungry people is a big part of that. Animals, industrial uses, compost are all part of the equation too. But the least preferred thing is we don't want to send this stuff to the landfill if we don't have to. All right, so one of the big things to do is food recovery. 1 in 7 Floridians struggle with hunger. And I'd be willing to bet that number is even higher now over the last several years. This is a little bit dated, with the pandemic and other related issues. But all the food banks across Florida the bigger ones are very regional. You have the Harry Chapin Food Bank down in your area, the Ending Hunger. And so they do a great job of grabbing food from our supermarkets, our different Walmarts and these type of places, and they recover a lot of that food, and they're able to lessen the impact on our food stream here. Of note, Second Harvest in Central Florida, I had a conversation with them, and it really blew me away. The network of partners they use, over 500 partners within those counties that they operate in. And they did over 63 million meals in 2019, which is just a really a big endeavor that they do. And that's just in Central Florida alone. So that food recovery is a big part of that equation. A lot of our supermarkets are involved with this to try to give back and pick up food to reduce it. The other issue is, the composting facilities. So what are governments doing? What are some of the private sector companies doing to help with the composting and food waste reduction? So the map on the right highlights current composting facilities in the bottom part of Florida that accept food waste or are processing food waste in some capacity. Not all these even accept from the public. They mostly take from the private sector, but you can see the furthest one south right now is in Manatee County, which is even north of me. There are none. There are no places right now to take or collect that food waste. So the infrastructure from the county side or the city municipal government side just isn't in place to support maybe a curbside collection or any of those type of things. Now, Lee County, interesting, has something called the composting facility. So if you go in and you Google Lee County, this is going to pop up, but it's not composting of food waste like we think about. It's actually biosolids, right? It's our waste. And they're able to kind of clean that up, strain it, and process it. And they actually make a product called Organic Lee, and that's like trademarked, and they sell that back. They bag it. I think it's like a couple dollars a bag, and they sell that back as a soil amendment. So that's really great, but that's not reducing food waste. That's something a little bit different, but it does have a positive impact on organics and kind of reducing some of the impacts there. Collier County does not have that system right now from the municipal side. But I wanted to put this sentence up here because I thought it was really interesting. I dove into kind of your ordinances there. Organic material, it's as they define it, is known as separated food, right? It can be designated a recyclable material. Right now, I don't believe it is. If the board deems it as a way, it's as necessary, if they see value in it and they can create that infrastructure, they can change it from a waste product and shift that over into a recyclable material. The reason I bring that up, that is a key thing in moving food waste recycling forward from the municipal side of things. In Sarasota County, where I work, food waste is still considered a waste product. And you are not allowed to pick up food waste commercially. We don't have companies that do it unless you're approved vendor through the board. And so we've had problems getting kind of that infrastructure put in place. I have tried to kind of lobby them a little bit that we need to change the definition of those organic food waste and move those to a recyclable material, because it is we can recycle it. But that's kind of where we are up in Sarasota. So to see this in Collier County, I think is great. It leaves that door open for the possibility down the road if they can find some economic viability to it. So I thought that was important to kind of bring up in your area. Other local options are kind of these smaller companies that are popping up that you can get involved with and participate with. The one at the top is called Sunshine Community Compost. That's in my area. And they actually set up bins that people can come and bring their food to in the city of Sarasota parks. They're not allowed to do it in the county parks, but they're doing it in the city of Sarasota and then a little bit up into Manatee County. I was talking with some folks at the extension. I guess they work with Naples Compost. I have not met this group, but they have a residential kind of pickup type program that goes around and you can participate in. I don't know much about that company, but that might be something to be of interest, especially if you're in an area that you can't compost, right? Maybe there's an HOA or some sort of restriction that's based upon that. So that's an interesting type company that's going around. Now, they wouldn't be allowed to do it in Sarasota County unless they got approved by the board. So that makes it tough for a little bit of that to enter in. I also wanted to note, they actually work a lot with Extension, and they had a big invasive fish catch down with the Sea Grant program, and there was about 1,600 pounds of food food from fish left over, they actually took those and took them out to their place and are going to break those down and compost them. We'll talk about seafood and fish a little bit in the backyard setting. We want to stay away from that, but they are more on the commercial side, so they're able to collect and utilize that type of thing. So there are some local options for you to get involved with, and we're starting to see more and more of those pop up across the state and across the country. Another thing I would kind of challenge you to do a little bit is this kind of what I call sustainability in action. So if you host local events, meetings, work with schools or anything, maybe start bringing a composting bin with you. I do it all the time. I have a little bin. I'll just take and put it out in the back of the meeting and say, hey, put your fruits and vegetable scraps in here and I will compost them for you. It's a way to just kind of get that conversation going. It's a way to kind of build that awareness and maybe start to build expectations. Someone may say, hey, where's our compost bins? So some of these pictures here show what we're doing with students and in our community. Right in the middle, I took some 22-gallon bins from Home Depot. I spray painted UF compost on them, and we started doing events at sporting events, collecting food waste at these larger events around, whether it was a running race, a lot of waste at those running races, or we have a rowing facility here. And you can see in the upper right, we just put them in large bins of wire, packed them in mulch and let them sit. And they naturally break down over time. So we're kind of doing a closed loop type system with that. And with that, I do a lot of education with the young people too, to kind of get them aware of what we're doing out here and why it's important. So great thing to do, try to work towards those or try to work those into your meetings as you go. I mentioned schools. Schools are a great place to start composting in. This is up in McIntosh Middle in our area. Those are actually 10 stacked vermiculture worm stations. So we have kind of an experiment going on with 2 different types of worms in there, some red wigglers and some night crawlers, and it's tied into their agricultural program. So schools, I get a lot of calls about helping schools start composting or doing some sort of vermicomposting at the thing. So opportunities are out there, schools, meetings, churches, you name it, kind of start to blend that into your event. I think it makes a difference. You can also purchase those compostable wares and those type of things to reduce single-use plastics. All right, so that's kind of the background and the issue in a nutshell of what's going on. I know I don't have a ton of time and I want to leave a lot for questions if there are at the end, but I'm going to run you through basically what is composting. What can we do, at home to start to divert some of that food waste and have a positive impact on our communities. Well, composting as a definition is the controlled decomposition of organic materials by microorganisms, right? It's a process that combines this C and N, carbon and nitrogen, and it's often labeled as browns and greens. We put that in a combination in our bins in a controlled fashion. And it's used for fertilizing and conditioning the land, right? Our soils are very sandy here. So using compost in our flower beds and on our plants is a great way to do that. Even if you're not a gardener, you're still diverting that stuff from the landfill and you can just spread it out on your lawn and it'll be great to use in there as well as lessening the amount of fertilizer. As the first step to getting started to compost, you need to pick a bin, right? All types of bins work. Just so you need to select one that kind of fits the scale of how much food you produce for the size of your family, and the size of your yard. You can use that, like up in the left corner there is a geo bin, just a basic round bin that you can order. It's a cheap way to do it. Welded wire below it work great as well. Maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing look with the welded wire, but there's lots of different systems for the DIY folks. You can make them out of pallets and build them and things like that. You can really be creative. I like the picture on the bottom because it has a dog. That was one of the biggest problems I had when I put up my, I had one of those earth domes kind of in the bottom right, is the lizards would get on there. My dog would always knock it over. So, kind of take that into consideration about your bin and what you want to use. those tumblers work well. They're very popular with a lot of people, which are the ones that are off the ground and you kind of turn and crank. Building it and putting it together are exactly the same components, same ingredients, no matter what type of system you use. The main thing though, if you do use one of those tumblers, you got to remember to add moisture to it. And I'll talk a little bit about the tumblers because there's a little bit different challenges as you go through. But selecting a bin is the first step. Bin placement, you do not need to have full sun. Like you'll see that listed a lot, put out in a full sun. I have bins here at the office that are under an oak tree. I don't mind that. We're mimicking nature. We're trying to make what happens in nature occur in this bin. So, a little bit of shade, a little bit of a cooler area. That's kind of what we want to do. It's fine. It's going to work just fine. The key is that balance of ingredients. The other thing is if you put it out in full sun, it is so hot here in Florida. You won't have much desire to go out and work on it and kind of turn it all the time if it's out in the full blasting sun. So put it somewhere convenient that makes sense for you. So what goes into the bin, right? This is a nice little infographic that sums it up. Browns plus greens plus water plus air will attract macroorganisms and those microorganisms, and it will create the compost we want, right? So let me take you kind of through each one of those a little bit and explain those. Now I will be sending Bridget, I actually did send Bridget an email, and I have videos of each of the components from type of bin, building the bin, screening your compost, and even collecting your food waste. So you can kind of get those later. I just didn't think we had time to go through those today, but you'll have those available later. So the first part is the browns. And the browns are going to make up the largest component of your bin. It's essentially the shelter, the housing, the main bulk of your bin. This is the stuff that's woody in nature. It's carbon-based. Think mulch. Oak leaves are probably one of the most common things we have here in Florida to use. A lot of people do that. Straw, different types of pine needle, maybe some palm type tree material. All those things are high in carbon, and they're going to make up that brown component of your bin. I love to use the chipped up mulch that I have because it's available here to me, and it breaks down really nice and creates a nice material that you can spread really easy. I always suggest if you already have some beds that you're using and you're using some kind of a brown mulch on it already, use that type of material. That way you can just kind of spread it, and you'll just be adding some nitrogen-rich material to those beds, which will help retain a little bit of water. Oak leaves can be challenging. If you just dump in lots of oak leaves, they tend to kind of get like a mat. They block water from kind of getting into the compost and mixing in, and they just get kind of mucky and kind of gross. So, just like they would on the ground if you kind of flip them over. So the best thing to do is take a mower or chipper and kind of break them up as best you can. The more surface area you create with your brown material, the better you can incorporate and have a more balanced bin. It's okay to have big items, small items, and sticks in there. They're not going to hurt, but over time, you may notice some things have been in there a long time and you want to pitch it out, but that's up to you. I mentioned this will make up the largest component in your bin. I always suggest a 2/3 to 1/3 of the next component to start. So, you'll go out and you'll take a bucket of browns and put it in your bin. You'll add a bucket of your food waste, and then you'll cover it back up with some browns. So you have 2 to 1 in your bin. That's a good starting point. Over time, you may notice, gosh, I have so many leaves and browns in here. From there, you can kind of slowly pull it back, maybe to 60%, and start to balance it more even. But I would definitely start with more of the browns. You'll never have a problem with too many browns in your bin. You'll just have a lot of that material. Where the errors and the frustration comes in, I see with a lot of people who start to compost, is they add way too much food and it just turns into a soupy mess and doesn't make that nice material we're after. So the food waste is the greens, right? These are higher in nitrogen content, right? It's going to be smaller amounts that, like I mentioned in there. Examples: fruits, vegetables, bread, coffee ground, lots of things you can put in there. Underline here is the good rule of thumb to go by, right? Food from plants are okay. If it's from an animal, we want to stay away. So if it grows from the ground, it's going to be good to put in there. If it's from an animal, we want to stay away from that, okay? No meats, no fish, no seafood, bones from chicken, things like that. Dairy items, lots of cheese. Those type of things can attract pests. It's a surefire way to get the possums and raccoons and all those things in there is to use those sort of items. So you want to be very careful what you put in, especially if you're backed up to an area that's vulnerable to that. You know, you want to make sure to use just those fruits and vegetables in there. Eggshells are okay. They're that one exception, but you want to make sure to rinse those out before you do it. Very, very important as it relates to that, okay? I've only had one problem with that sports compost I did, and it was from eggshells. Someone put about 6 or 7 dozen eggs in there, and they still had that goop on it. And I think some possums got right in there and they dug it right out. Wasn't the biggest, problem where it was at, but that's something to be mindful of. When you add your food in, be sure to mix and incorporate it in. That's a nice thing to do to kind of create more surface area, get it kind of spread out throughout. What that'll do as well is allow it to break down quicker, more consistently, and it'll keep some of that potential of a pest or those type of things. I always like to say, put a little bit of browns on top. That'll keep some of those fruit flies and those things down as well. I know I'm kind of short on time, so I'll kind of speed up a little bit, but you want to create this kind of balance of that 2/3 to 1/3 to start. You'll see online that it's listed often 30-to-1 ratio carbon to nitrogen. That doesn't mean, 30 pieces of mulch for every 1 strawberry. That's not what that means. It's more about the rate it breaks down. And I'll kind of show you here. This is all on our website, so you can go in there. If you just do IFAS composting, it all kind of pops up. But these are different ingredients from coffee grounds down to wood, and it shows the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If I highlight a few of them, these are considered green. Coffee grounds, even grass clippings when they're fresh, table scraps, vegetables. These all have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of that 12, 15, 20-to-1. So not a lot of carbon in there. That's why they're considered a green or nitrogen. On the flip side, when you do leaves or wood or sawdust, you can see the numbers are much higher. 60-to-1, 600-to-1, 100-to-1. And that makes sense. The higher that carbon number, that C is, the longer it's going to take to break down, and the harder the substance will be. So that's kind of where that balance comes from. And as you compost, you'll get better and better and better at learning the rates and seeing how things break down. The third ingredient, super, super important, is air. You don't need to type anything in the chat here, but composting is an aerobic process, meaning it needs oxygen, it needs air. The microorganisms that are going to get attracted to your bin, they need that air to survive. That's what they want. On the flip side, like in the landfill where it gets covered up and starved of oxygen, that's a different process. That goes through a process of methogenesis. There are different types of microbes that get in there. And so that's what produces biogas. You're not going to do that in the backyard setting because we're turning the compost and you're creating air with it. All right. And then last, we want to keep it nice and damp. So when you add your food into your bin and you kind of mix and incorporate it in, be sure to add some water to it. Keep it nice and damp, almost like a damp sponge. You don't want to completely inundate it with water because then it has a harder time to get the air in there and flow in there. But just going through the pile, make sure you get around the outside of the bin as well. And that'll help keep it nice and damp. And you can always test that. You can reach in the middle of your compost and kind of pull a little handful out. If it's going to be a little bit warm and it might have that little dampness that kind of holds together. You can buy a temperature probe and a water meter if you want to kind of monitor it. The water probes don't work that great, but it's always nice to have maybe temperature. That's a good thing to get. So those are your 4 main ingredients, right? Your browns, your greens, your air, and your water. If you get those in the right balance, you're going to attract all kinds of different critters here, right? Number one is your macroorganisms, and you're definitely going to get these. You're going to get sow bugs, pill bugs, lots of millipedes, right? We have tons of those you'll see in your bin. You may see some spiders. You may get some little worms in there, but I don't want you to confuse that with vermicomposting. That's a whole different system. So don't go out and buy a bunch of red worms or red wigglers and put them in there, because what happens when you create your bin, your pile, the temperature raises. And they don't like temperatures high, and you'll probably end up killing them. But you may see some of that type of stuff in there. One critter to be mindful of, all right, are going to be ants. Those might be in there, whether those black kind of crazy ants that get in there that aren't really that harmful. But the fire ants are something to be aware of. And that usually happens down at the base of where you put your composting bin. If you take a block of wood or a brick and put it in your yard in Florida, it's almost like you attract the fire ants in some places. So be mindful of that. You can use a lot of water around the base to kind of get them out of there. But if you notice it continues, maybe you can find a different location for it and change up where you're doing that to reduce that. The microorganisms is what we want to attract. There are three really main classes of these little bugs that get in there, right? You have the saprophytic bacteria, the mesos, and the thermos, right? The mesophilic, number 2, are the ones that we want to attract. They operate in kind of that mid 60 to low hundreds range. That's what's doing the work in your compost bin. When you build your bin, it's going to be the ambient temperature. So if you went out today, it'd probably be about 80 some degrees if you were to measure it. After about a day, 2 days, 3 days, you'll notice that temperature start to peak, and it'll get up to 95, 100, maybe 105 degrees. That's an indicator that you've got a good system working and it's breaking down that material. That's what we want. It may level out and kind of drop back down. That's fine. Just keep building and building your bin and adding more food in, and you'll continue the process. It always gets finished first at the bottom. These thermophilic bacteria are ones that operate at a higher temp. Those are harder to get to attract. You have to have a really nice balance of your bin to get there. But if you get it up to about 130 degrees for multiple days, it'll kill off any potential pathogens or invasive type seeds that could be in there. You don't want to add any chipped up Brazilian peppers or something like that, an invasive, because those get in your bin, you can spread and it can be a mess. So be mindful of that. For those of you who have compost and maybe let it sit for a while, you'll notice you'll have stuff growing right out of it. Nice little tomato plant, pepper plant. That's because you didn't get the temperature high enough to kill those seeds off. It's perfectly fine. That happens all the time. And plus you've created this real nitrogen rich environment in your bin, right? So that knows that you're doing a good job on that. So those are the microorganisms that you have. I would say get one of those temperature probes, those soil probes. You can order them online or get them at one of the box stores. It's kind of cool to monitor your bin and just kind of see that temperature and how you're doing as you incorporate it. Just to kind of wrap up, I have a IFAS online certificate course. It kind of goes in a lot more detail. There's a couple modules on the issue of food waste that I touched on, some backyard composting, and even gets a little bit into vermicomposting. There's usually a cost for that. I've sent a code out to the group there. You can use that code at the bottom, though it'll be in your newsletter or whatnot. And you can enter that in and you can get it for 50% off. Kind of go through and see some of the different things that we do. And there's a couple other agents who are around the state, up in Leon County and down in South Florida, who have helped me build this. So it's kind of a cool thing. And you can get a cool little certificate as a result. I know I kind of flew through that. I tried to touch a bunch of different things, but there are a lot of things you can do at the community level to get involved. Those events are a big way to get involved. Bring that composting bin. It starts the conversation. Purchase those compostable wares. Move away from single-use plastics as best you can. And then just do the backyard composting. That's a great thing to do. And with that, I will open it up to questions. I know I rushed through, but I saw the timer. I could talk about this stuff all day. It's something that is wildly important, and it just seems to continue to grow. So I'm happy to take any questions you have. I guess I'll stop the share and we'll go from there. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Randall. That was fascinating. Even for me, I, at the beginning of the pandemic, bought a composter, a tumbler, and started composting. And I've learned a lot about why I had slime. So I hope that everybody who's here today may, see the summertime as a time to experiment. What I suggest now is that we open it up for questions and discussion. If you want to participate, we'll keep it really informal. That's the goal of Y&How. So turn on your camera so we can see you, and wave, and we'll do some questions. Kathy, you shot your hand up first, so put on your mics, and I will try to moderate this discussion. Go ahead, Kathy.
Our church is going to compostable cups and plates for small groups. Does that stuff count as brown or green if you put it in a compost?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I've done is try to encourage businesses and events and places like that to buy or purchase these compostable type paper, or even those like forks that are made from like corn and different bioplastics and things like that. They're more expensive, which is one part of it. And the other thing is a lot of that stuff doesn't break down in the backyard setting. Those harder plastics and those cups don't work that great. But I will say they're still better than purchasing plastic made from, petroleum, right? So there is that impact life cycle part of it. I've tried everything. I've tried it in my worm bins and all sorts of stuff. It will break down in a commercial setting. But as far as the paper plates and those type of things, yeah, those can be put in your bin and considered a brown, right? And so I would suggest with any type of paper, whether it's those type of wares or even just shredded paper or office paper, things like that, if you use those in your bin, try to shred them up or tear them up as best you can. Even coffee filters, you'll see them in there. They're designed to hold together paper, so it takes a long time. So anytime you can break that up beforehand or use a shovel and kind of break it up helps. And I wouldn't make that a dominant type brown, okay? Just make that maybe a supplement. Just don't, as of the other brown material. So just kind of mix in parts of it, don't make it, 2/3 of the paper plate shredded and your food waste. It's not going to work real well. You still need to use that mulch or those other type materials. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
I just also want to make a plug for Naples Compost, which is a Growing Climate Solutions partner of recent. So if this is something that you feel very strongly about, but you live in an apartment building, or it would be very difficult for you to implement, reach out, learn about Naples Compost. They do pick up. So they're one of our partners. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that.
I don't know that company, but they may even do larger events. I mean, they may come out and staff an event. If you have a big gala or event, something like that, some of those companies will come out and put the bins and staff it a little bit so people do it correctly. So that's something to look into as well. I know the groups in our area have added that to their business model.
Any other questions?
I see Robin.
Okay, Jean.
Has a little thing.
Anna, you mentioned Naples Compost. We're on Marco Island, and there's a lot of interest here. We're right over the border from Naples. Do you think they'd be interested in doing anything with Marco Island people?
We can reach out to them or put them in touch with you.
Okay.
I think they wouldn't make the trip down to Marco for one house, but if there was enough group interest, we'll put you in touch with Amanda there.
Okay, because they could do it for our church maybe too.
Other questions? I don't see a lot of faces here.
Robin.
Josephine?
Hi, Anna.
Hi.
I just wanted to thank you for this informative session and to reinforce what I just heard. And one of the biggest issues, 8 out of 20 of the top drawdown solutions, and I don't know if people know what drawdown, the whole work behind drawing down, it's not enough to just slow down carbon emissions or greenhouse gases. We have to draw it into the negative. We have to put it back where it belongs. And food waste is now the #1 drawdown solution. 8 out of 20 of the top solutions come in this area of food and food waste. And I'll just challenge people to do something I did this winter. I went to my local Publix where I shop and spoke to the manager there. And you're right, what Randall said about Harry Chapin takes a lot of the meat, they frozen meats and stuff in big quantities. But I was shocked to see that our local Publix in Neapolitan throws out 2 entire baskets full of baked goods and baked products every day. And I took it upon myself to speak to him and get a local church, a couple of local churches that I organized a group of friends in my community. And every day we pick up 2 baskets full. It's about $400 worth of baked goods that would be thrown in their dumpster, and it's going to people who need it. So I just urge people to talk to your local grocer and make sure that all their product is going somewhere. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever get to it in this country, but when you think about 40%, it's actually so wasteful and sinful to think that there's so many children and people going to bed hungry. So check it out, see what they're doing. If, encourage them if they're not, but also see if you can lend a hand. And a lot of the Harry Chapins won't take baked goods because they're so quick. They need to be turned around immediately and not put in a warehouse. So, give it a shot. I tell you, we've been saving a lot of pounds of bread goods that would have just been dumped, and they're still very, very edible.
Yeah, just to kind of touch on that, you brought a couple of those supermarkets up, and they do a great job with that. They're dialed in with those networks, but they do also produce a lot of food waste. And I don't know if you remember, I had that kind of map up with just the composting facilities that were there. We just don't have them. Up in Tampa Bay for a while, Publix was doing, and a few other places, they were collecting their food waste from there. And it was a pretty good system. They were taken to a place called Bay Mulch, and they were starting to kind of get that commercial side. I see some opportunities on the commercial side, kind of being that first step. And for some reason, it didn't continue. It didn't go on. It fell apart. I don't know if that's because they weren't getting enough volume. I don't know what that tipping point is economically. Might have been too far to pick up and transport. Or I also suspect legal gets involved a lot of times too. But there is that opportunity. But if you have to transport it all the way to Okeechobee or Apopka or one of these long places, it becomes, kind of cost inhibitive to do that. But I know there's a lot of interest on the commercial side of businesses to do it.
I see, Robin, you have your hand up. Do you have a question? Take yourself off of mute.
Yep. Hi, Anna. Hi, everybody. So I am a writer with Florida Weekly, and I write the home and garden stories every week. And I've written about growing climate solutions before, and I'm working with them on a story about composting because National Composting Day is May 29th. So I have a story that's going to be running on May 26th. And I'm curious to know if anybody here is currently composting and would be willing to be interviewed and share a couple of pictures of you in your composting bin. So I'm not going to take time today. I'm just going to put my email address in the chat. And if you are someone in Collier County or in Bonita who composts and would like to be part of the story, just send me an email and I'll follow up with you. And Randall, I'll also be reaching out to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Ty?
Yeah, a quick question. You had mentioned 1 in 7 Floridians struggle with hunger. The slide went past pretty quickly. Where did that statistic come from?
Yeah, so that came from about the 2018, 2019, just from some of the data that from the food bank that here in Florida, just from that the Central Florida Food Bank had some of those numbers out. So I I don't know exactly. I could probably find it out, but it was certainly dated from like back in 2018 or 2019 on that. That's why
I'm not sure it would be too much different today, but
yeah, it's probably the same, it's probably pretty static. And a lot of those, obviously there's even some numbers that deal with, the number of children out of that. How many are children or
right.
young people who are, really the most vulnerable? But a good question. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but that's just kind of a one I got from one of the food banks or one of those.
Okay, that's fine.
Feeding
Thanks.
Florida, maybe somebody like that.
Okay.
Jean?
Randall, you had mentioned that we are able to capture the methane from the is that in Collier County or in all in Florida? And what does that mean? How does that done? And isn't that pretty significant?
Yeah, it is. It's not done very often. In Collier, they're not doing that I know of, or even Lee County. Lee County does more of a waste to energy where they burn all kinds of stuff. But the methane capture we have in Sarasota County. And so basically as the landfill gets capped, right, there's a series of pipes that are throughout the landfill that are able to kind of capture that gas as it comes out. They cool it, and then they run it through, they kind of scrub it and run it through a series of big generators, big Caterpillar generators, the size of kind of a car. And what that does is it creates power and it feeds back into the grid. I've seen upwards of anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 home equivalent in Sarasota County per day is what it's kind of producing. All right, so it offsets, to give you an idea how much power that is. And so the county actually, there's a company called ARIA who does that, and they actually give money back to the county. The county receives a check for that to offset that. So it's just kind of the system they've gone in Sarasota, but I don't believe any of the counties you guys are in have that. It's a little bit different from the.
So years ago, I toured a garbage to energy plant at the Collier landfill. It just powered a few homes. I don't know if it was some kind of test thing, but everything you just described is what I saw.
Yeah, so that's the methane capture in Sarasota. There's also what's known as just general waste to energy, where they take trash, maybe stuff, contaminated recyclables, and they take it to this plant and then they just burn it. They incinerate it and they capture it. That's really big up in Pinellas County. Hillsborough County has that. So when you look at the recycling rates, that's kind of what I was touching on a little bit with the recycling rates. You'll see Pinellas County has these 90% recycling rates that they claim, but that's not traditional recycling like we think. So, what goes in our bin goes off. There's different ways. There's traditional recycling, then they add in this credit and they get some different numbers thrown a little bit on top. So that kind of inflates that number a little bit on how they report that. And you can kind of go online and look. They have all the different PDFs from every county on that show how much is actually recycled, what their energy credit is, if any, and things like that. So it's kind of interesting to kind of dabble in that sort of stuff too, because they all report it subtly different too. When I see a county does about 90% or something, I'm always suspicious, right? There's a lot of contamination with single stream recycling and things like that. But Naples is still pretty high. So, I mean, they're doing something right there. I don't know. I've never toured their plants.
Margaret?
Hi, everybody. I have two questions for you, Randall. One is an easy one. Basically, if you're making compost, how do you know when it's done? And then my internet connection has been spotty. I might have missed that. But my second question is bigger, which is if you could describe what you wish was happening for composting, let's say for the whole state of Florida, what would total success look like? If you're dreaming away, you could have exactly what you wanted. What would that look like?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so first is, when is it done? I didn't really cover that kind of end part of it, what it looks like. And I think in the video, I have a good one with the screening. But if you start to go out to your bin and you turn your compost, you're going to see it's just nice and dark. You'll see that dark color, especially at the bottom. That's why they, a lot of the different composters will have a little window that kind of pulls up and you can grab from the bottom. It's always going to finish on the bottom first. But an important thing to remember is it's not going to all turn into that nice compost material. Okay. You're going to have sticks, you're going to have leaves, you're going to have different pieces of things. An avocado, skin seems to never break down. So you're going to have certain things in there that'll be part of it. Okay. So when you kind of pull that out. So if you want to screen it, buy a nice little thin screen, like a 1/4 inch kind of hard wire screen. I wouldn't use like like a flimsy screen, get something a little more rigid. You can kind of put that and make a screen out of it and get that nice cleaner material out of it. And then save that stuff, your overs, and put those back in your bin, because they got the microorganisms, they're on those things, so you want to just kind of pitch them back in. But you don't have to screen it. If you just see that it looks really good and down at the bottom, and you can just use that and spread that. I have a really good video on that. It's called Screen Your Compost. It kind of shows it, and I kind of do some stuff. The other thing we always find in there are those little pieces of plastic that we stick on every piece of fruit, right? Every fruit has that little sticker, and those, if you pull them, they're made of plastic. So I always have youth programs out here, and we always kind of pull those out. I always try to challenge them in their science fair to come up with a solution, but I have hope that maybe that'll happen someday, but probably not. That's just hard to change. I guess from, what would be considered success, I think the first thing to be great is to just like they did with recycling. They set that target of 75% by 2020. They did it back in 2008. If we could get from a legislative side some sort of targets or momentum there, that would probably start to drive some of that infrastructure and investment. That's one component that would really we need. It just doesn't make fiscal sense to transport stuff all across the state. It's so expensive to do that. So having some of that type of stuff in place would be great. Even at the municipal landfills, to contract with companies to come in and potentially do some public-private partnerships that have, instead of turning left to go up into the dump area, they can turn right and dump the food waste. So some of that type of stuff. I mentioned the commercial side. We're seeing little bits of that kind of come up with companies working with restaurants and some of these stores that produce a lot of weight. There's a lot of drive with our restaurants. People want to do it. They want to divert this kind of stuff. And so, to kind of continue to get some of that going, I think there's a huge opportunity to do that. From a residential pickup, that would be amazing, but it's difficult. And I'll tell you why. We have so many challenges, even recycling correctly, right? Plastic films and wrong items and stuff like that, and contamination. So to have a composting pickup is going to be really challenging as well, to get larger groups to do. It can be done. They do it in lots of places, right? But it's still challenging. So the best way to handle when you take all food waste, not just fruits and vegetables, is to go to that kind of aerobic digester, waste to energy, so they can transport that and produce power. We had a place called Harvest Power in Orlando. It closed. It's going through some challenges. They were taking food waste from the city of Orlando, restaurants, residential people were dropping it off at drop-off spots, Disney hotels. They were doing a lot with Disney, and they were capturing that, breaking it down as like biogas and creating power. But they couldn't even keep that going. I'm not sure what happened, but that's been successful in places like California on the West Coast. They've done a lot of that, and because it's expensive, out there to do that sort of stuff. So that's a big driver. So those are some successes that I like to see, things like that. I'd like to see more cities just kind of open up parks and opportunities for the commercial sector to come in and do things like, the Naples composter is, and different places like that. I think that's a good start too. It needs to become more the norm, I'm
going to ask the one last question on the how end. And I know we're running a bit over, but the conversation is, I think, very interesting. When you start composting, one of the questions is, every day you cut your vegetables, do you keep adding fresh stuff to the bin every day, or do you have to save it all up and then put it all in at once? Because if you keep adding every other day, each, different pieces are in different states of decomposition. So is that a mistake that we're making? Like, you chop your carrots, you add them. The next day you add your tomato. And then what happens to the banana peel a week ago versus the new stuff that you put on top? How do you handle that so that you finally get to a compost
finished product? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good point. So, do you keep adding it every day or collect it up? You can do either way. Either way works. For me, I have a bin, I keep it in my freezer and I capture it up for the week or whatever. And I build it up and I bring it here for different programs and things for that. That works for me. I know some people will put a bin up on their counter and stuff like that and keep it. I always get a little nervous with that, with bugs and things like that. But building it up is one way. But if you have the time to go out there and throw in your stuff every day, that works well too. But you're right. So it's been sitting, you keep building up your compost layer by layer by layer by layer, but everything at the top is still that fresh vegetables, right? And it's mixed in. So there's a couple things you can do. You can obviously try to turn your compost and get the compost from the bottom that's nice and dark first. If you have a bin, you can actually pull it up and move it and start a new pile with the fresh stuff and harvest the stuff at the bottom, kind of work it through. A lot of people like to have two bins, actually. They kind of have one they fill up and then they move to the next, let that first one kind of cure and kind of create a system that way. But you're always, you don't want to just throw your food right on top and then try to pull some out, because you're going to have fresh peels and things like that. So you kind of got to manage that and manipulate that a little bit. For those of you who are going to use a tumbler, this is especially a problem, because when you throw your food in and spin it around, that food's going to be all mixed up in there, as opposed to more layered, like a lasagna kind of with the regular bin on the ground. So that's why a lot of those tumblers will have 2 units on them. Fill up the one maybe 2/3 full or so, and then move to the next one. You don't want to fill it completely full, because you want to be able to turn it and tumble it. So, and they get really heavy too. A lot of those type of tumblers. So that I don't know if that answers the question, but you're right. It is kind of one of those things that you're going to run into as you add more new, as it breaks down. You're going to have to kind of piece through that and put it back in. I don't know if that helped at all, but
So I have that kind of crank style tumbler, and it has a divider in it. So
Yes.
one half gets the new stuff, and one half after a certain point, we stop adding to it. But we tumble it each day and add some fresh water to it. So that seems to work real well. I learned I'm not exactly doing it right with just the greens. So I learned a lot from your talk.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I see with folks who use the tumblers is they forget to kind of add some of the water, which you said you're doing, which is great. Mm-hmm. The other thing is you get in this kind of habit of just taking your bucket of food, dumping it in, closing it, and going. And then it turns kind of into more of a soupy mess, right? So you need to at least balance it off with the brown, at least equal amount, at least dump in equal amounts, just at that, to kind of keep a balance going. You're on the right track. Start with the one, build it up. Don't build it all the way so it's packed full, right? No. You want to be able to turn it a little bit and maybe build it up for 2 or 3 weeks. Move to the other one for a couple weeks, and that first one will be ready to go. Stuff breaks down pretty quick here. Another little tip is to break your food up or cut it up into more pieces. The more surface area you create, the faster it'll work. If you just take an extra step when you add your food waste in to mix it in really well and wet it there, it can be gone within just a few weeks, all of it, really quickly. I love doing our classes here, because one of the big questions we have is, well, how long does it take? And so I'll build up a bin in month 1 class. The next month we'll have a class and I'll say, look, it's all gone. So it's a good visual that way, but within the month it's gone,
Yeah.
Okay, so we're way past our usual 12 o'clock cutoff, but I think this has been super informative for many of us. And I just want to, I guess, get in the final word that this is the last of the Y&How series for this season, and we hope to pick this up next season. Please look at the email that you will receive from Growing Climate Solutions in a couple of hours or within an hour or two. It's going to have a lot of the tips that Randall had mentioned. It's going to have the links to the video and the coupon for taking that course, which sounds really interesting. You know, dog days of summer, something to do inside, become certified. One of the things at Growing Climate Solutions is talking about what you've learned with others. So we encourage you to, join us, read about the things we do, and then tell all your friends about what you've learned. We want to get more people engaged. Maybe you want to watch Randall's video series with somebody, but the only way to convince other people to do it is for them to have a role model. So each of you have the potential to bring along more people into the fold. And to do that, you can also join us on our social media. When you see something cool, post it on yours. Keep spreading the word. And with that, I hope that you will join us next year. Keep engaged with our newsletter and other options. Take Randall's course, because I'm sure it will go into much more detail. See his videos and keep spreading the good word. This is how we have to make this not something that just people who care about climate do, but something that everybody does. It has to become normative and mainstream. And the way we get to that is by each of you influencing a couple of other friends and having it catch on. So with that, let's thank Randall for his, great expertise. Please return the survey that will come out to you. It takes 5 minutes. And we'll tune in next year. You'll see the newsletter will advertise the next series of Y&How starting around October, November. Thank you so much. Thank you, Randall, for all your time. And keep doing the good stuff, everyone. Thank you.
I thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.